Maybe you're not broken, maybe you're just in the process of being reborn. Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." But what if after so much light, all you feel is still loneliness? You followed the path. You dove into the spirituality, faced the inner chaos, went through the dark night of the soul. You shed layers, silenced the world, learned to listen to what screams inside. And yet, now in the place where peace should dwell, what accompanies you is a void. Dense, silent, persistent. You have enlightened yourself. But why does it feel like this only distanced you from people? Why did your awakening leave you alone? You may not want to admit it out loud, but you feel like your own evolution has disconnected you from the world. Small talk lost its meaning. Old friendships dissolved without explanation. And love. Love seems more and more unattainable. Is there a price for awakening? If you feel this way, know this. You are not wrong. You are living a sacred stage, but no one prepares you to face it. A spiritual solitude. The place where the soul has already left prison, but has not yet found a new home. It is in this gap that many people get lost, because this isn't talked about in self-knowledge books. No one warns you that, when connecting with your essence, you may need to unlearn everything you called company, and it hurts. It hurts because we are taught to believe that growth will always bring comfort, but true spiritual growth sometimes tears apart before curing. And this is where many give up. They confuse silence with abandonment. They confuse solitude with rejection. They confuse being alone with being wrong. But what if it is precisely in this silence that God whispers loudest? What if this feeling of emptiness is not absence, but a call from your own soul? You feel like you're becoming someone else, but no one around you seems to notice. You have learned to be at peace in chaos, but chaos is now the absence of presence. It's the absence of someone who sees you, from someone who reaches the depths you have reached. And perhaps this is the deepest wound after healing. You came back to yourself, but no one came back with you. It's as if the price of enlightenment is walking for a while without hands to hold. And in that time, what was once support turns into silence. What was once affection is now echo. But does it have to be this way? Is this loneliness a punishment or a portal? If you feel this way, don't run away, because there is a truth that no one told you, and she can change everything. So before I continue, I need to tell you something. If this touched you, if you feel that this post-awakening emptiness is speaking to your soul, write here in the comments, "I have become enlightened, but I still feel alone." Because it's not just you. Thousands are feeling this right now. And when you speak out, you don't just express yourself, you free others from silence. This video was made for you who are in this invisible limbo, between the pain that remains and the peace that has not yet arrived. So don't just listen, feel, understand. Because what comes next can completely transform the way you look at this loneliness. Leave a like if this makes sense. Subscribe to the channel because this journey doesn't end here. In fact, she's just getting started. You dedicated yourself to healing. You immersed yourself in books, meditations, retreats. You let go of distractions, faced your own abysses, faced memories that hurt so much they could barely be spoken aloud. You sat in the dark, waiting for something inside you to finally breathe. And it did. There was a moment when you felt something shift, something break free. You became enlightened, not with fireworks, but with silence, with truth. With that feeling that can't be explained in words, but that you recognize when you look back and realize you're no longer the same person. But now it feels like you're paying a price no one warned you would come with the light. The silence hasn't disappeared. On the contrary, it's become even more present. Not that serene, meditative silence, but a dense, solitary silence. An inner space where the voices of the world no longer reach, but where no one else seems to be able to enter either. It's as if the enlightenment has removed you from everything that once made sense. Conversations have lost their flavor. Connections feel superficial. Encounters, empty. The relationships that once fulfilled you now only show you how far you've drifted. And you silently wonder, has the light separated me from the world? Why the more awake I become, the more distant I feel from others? Why does my light seem invisible to those I most want to see? There's a pain hidden behind spiritual growth that no one talks about. The pain of no longer being understood. The pain of becoming a stranger even to those who have always been by your side. The pain of walking new paths, but without company. You look around and realize you now understand things you couldn't before. You perceive patterns, sense energies, see truths that were previously hidden, and at the same time you feel like no one around you can reach you anymore, as if your soul has changed stations but the world is still listening to a different frequency. And it hurts, because as much as you've freed yourself from many chains, there's one that continues to tighten, the feeling of no longer belonging. You try to fit in again. You force smiles. You tolerate shallow conversations. You dim your light to fit into spaces that once felt comfortable. But you soon realize this only makes things worse. The pain of betraying your essence to be accepted is even greater than the pain of being alone. So you retreat back into yourself. And in this retreat you ask yourself, is there something wrong with me? Is this loneliness my fault? Am I isolating myself too much? Or am I simply being guided toward another kind of company? Maybe no one told you, but spiritual awakening doesn't come with pats on the back or welcome parties. It comes with goodbyes, with uncomfortable silences, with breakups that feel unfair, with abandonments that hurt more because you no longer fear them. You understand them. And understanding hurts too, because deep down, you didn't want to understand. You just wanted to be seen. You wanted to be loved in your new form. You wanted someone to say, I see you, even now. But that rarely happens. The invisible problem is this: the soul awakens, but the world doesn't awaken with it. And this creates a disconnect, a gap, an abyss where you feel that everything you've achieved internally distances you from what was external. And as much as you know this is necessary, that growth is solitary, that the butterfly emerges from the cocoon alone, you're still human. You still want company. You still want a look that says, I feel this too. You still want someone to walk beside you, even if in silence. You're not asking for too much. It's not neediness. It's humanity. It's your soul remembering that, however much enlightenment is internal, we are beings of connection, and connections aren't lost when we awaken. They simply change form. They change depth. They change purpose. But until new connections emerge, you remain in this space between worlds. And this space hurts. It's lonely because it's true. It's true because it demands courage. And it's precisely this silent courage that proves how far you've evolved. You're not being punished for your light. You're simply crossing the gap between who you were and who you'll yet meet. The right people don't arrive when you become perfect. They arrive when you become whole. And wholeness sometimes comes after loss, after renunciation, after you choose again and again to stand by your own soul, even when no one else will. If you've made it this far and feel like the video was created with the words you couldn't say, then write in the comments, I came back to myself, but no one came back with me. Because when you write, you don't just release the pain, you recognize that it's part of the process. And in that recognition, other souls find themselves too. The truth is that awakening splits you in two. There's a silent rupture, invisible to others, but blatant within you. Part of you still carries memories, old desires, the need to be validated, to be loved the way you learned to ask for love. But the other part, the one awakening, begins to see life through a different lens. And this lens reveals a new reality, where before you sought belonging, now you seek truth. Where before you begged for attention, now you beg for silence. Where before you accepted crumbs, now your soul demands wholeness. It's in this space between who you were and who you're becoming that the most acute pain arises. Because in this in-between, you still miss the old, even though you know you no longer fit in it. And you haven't yet fully encountered the new, because it's still taking shape within you. It's like walking among ruins and seeds. What was no longer holds. What will be has not yet blossomed. And this in-between is lonely. It's a journey where you need to listen deeply to yourself, even when the whole world seems silent. Rumi said, you have to keep breaking your heart until it opens. And maybe that's what's happening to you right now. Your heart isn't being destroyed. It's being opened, layer by layer, expectation by expectation, fear by fear. Every loneliness you feel, every absence that seems to consume you, is an opening. A space being created within you for something truer to enter. But in this process, emptiness is inevitable. Not because you're failing, but because the soul needs space to expand. And the ego doesn't know what to do with so much space. Have you noticed that after awakening, your sensitivity has increased? That you now feel more Not just your own pain, but the pain of others. Not just your own absence, but the collective absence. It's as if, upon awakening, you've been connected to a frequency that was previously dormant. And this frequency doesn't lie. It shows you what's out of alignment, reveals what needs to be left behind, pushes you in directions that your mind still resists, but that your soul already recognizes as true. This spiritual sensitivity is a gift, but also a burden, because it distances you from everything that was superficial. You begin to realize that you can no longer pretend. You can no longer participate in empty conversations, maintain relationships for convenience, accept presence without depth. And this, in the eyes of others, may seem like arrogance, cold detachment, indifference. But you know it's nothing of the sort. You've simply grown tired of hurting yourself by trying to fit into places that weren't made for your essence. The spiritual root of your loneliness isn't the absence of people, it's the absence of true connection. Because once you know the silence that heals, it's impossible to go back to accepting the noise that hurts. Once you find a fragment of your soul, everything shallow becomes unbearable. You're not demanding, you're aware. You're not isolating yourself, you're preserving yourself. You haven't distanced yourself from others, you've simply grown closer to yourself. And this movement, however necessary, is deeply lonely at first. But this solitude isn't a mistake, it's a portal. A call for you to sit with yourself and for the first time listen to yourself unfiltered. It's in this silence that answers begin to emerge. Not the answers that come from outside, but the ones that spring from within. And when they emerge, they don't need words. They arrive as a peace that can't be explained, but that you recognize, because it finally makes sense. Perhaps you're in that exact place right now. An inner space where everything seems too quiet, too lonely, too confusing. But what if I told you that this is the most sacred phase of your journey? That this emptiness you feel isn't punishment, but preparation? That before receiving something new, your soul needs to empty itself of the old? And that, while this happens, silence is your greatest teacher? It's not easy to accept this, because we've been taught to fear emptiness, to seek fulfillment at any cost, to flee from silence as if it were an enemy. But Rumi reminds us that it is precisely in absence that the divine presence reveals itself, that it is in the breaking of the heart that light enters, that it is in the end of what you knew as home that a new temple can be built. Spiritual awakening doesn't promise comfort, it promises truth. And truth often arrives like an earthquake. It shatters certainties, dismantles defenses, and reveals illusions. But only after this destruction is freedom born. The freedom to no longer need to mold yourself. The freedom to inhabit who you are, even if no one else understands. The freedom to no longer trade your light to fit into the shadows of others. If you're feeling all this right now, if your soul is tired of explaining what you don't even know how to put into words, then you're on the right path. Because only those who are awakening feel this strangeness. Only those who are transforming feel this kind of solitude. It's a silence that burns but also heals, that hurts but also liberates. Write in the comments, "I'm going through the portal." This phrase isn't just a rant, it's a declaration to your soul, a reminder that no matter how difficult it may be, you're going through exactly what you need to go through. And that on the other side of this portal, there's something waiting for you that can only be reached by those who have the courage to cross it. No one tells you this, but there's a moment on the spiritual path when everything seems to fall silent. Not because you're alone, but because you're finally being heard from within. The solitude that comes after enlightenment is neither a mistake nor a punishment. It's a subtle, silent, and sacred stage. It's the echo of your own truth reverberating in the space previously occupied by noise, distractions, expectations, and attachments that no longer supported who you've become. It's as if, upon crossing the portals of self-knowledge, you've entered an inner temple. And like every temple, it requires silence to reveal what dwells within. What you call abandonment, what you sometimes think of as rejection, may actually be the space the universe is creating for something higher to take the place of what was once just emotional survival. And this space is uncomfortable, because you grew up believing that love is a constant presence, that affection is measured by proximity, that companionship is the opposite of loneliness. But now you're learning that love can be silence, that presence can be a meaningful absence, that the most faithful companion you can have is that of your own soul. You are not being left aside. You are being invited to enter within yourself, to listen to the new voice that emerges after the pain. A voice that doesn't scream, doesn't beg for attention. It simply exists. And by existing, that's enough. But this voice, this new soul that is emerging, can only be heard in the interval when all others fall silent. That's why silence is necessary. It is not empty. It is gestation. It is the womb where your new essence is being formed. And yes, there is solitude in this process, but not an empty solitude. It is a solitude filled with meaning, a solitude that prepares, that matures, that heals in silence. Before, you moved with urgency. You chased connections that would complete you, loves that would prove your worth, bonds that would guarantee you were worthy of being chosen. Now, something inside you has changed. Not because you've given up on love, but because you've begun to understand that true love isn't built on the absence of pain, but on the presence of truth. And this truth doesn't always come from outside. Often, it's born of internal confrontation, from the discomfort of being with yourself, from the surrender of wanting to be saved, from the courage to remain, even when everything seems to have dissolved around you. The hidden key lies in this. The pain of loneliness is not an absence of love. It's the presence of your soul demanding space. It's the universe cleansing your life of the relationships that drained you, the connections that couldn't support your light, the situations that kept your essence chained. There's no punishment in this, there's liberation. But freeing yourself sometimes hurts, because you don't yet fully know what will come in return. You only feel what's gone. And in the gap between what's gone and what hasn't yet arrived, there's confusion. There's fear. There's this anguish of feeling like everything is at a standstill, when in fact, everything is reorganizing for the new. You no longer recognize yourself in the old version of yourself, but you still don't know how to fully inhabit the new one. This limbo, this crossing, this dense silence that envelops you, is precisely the territory of healing. It's where you stop being who the world expected and begin to become who your soul has always been. It's not an easy path. No one who has lightly shed their illusions has gone through this without feeling like they were losing ground. But the ground you lose is what was never firm, what was never true, what was always conditioned by the fear of being alone. When you move through this space with presence, with surrender, with deep acceptance of what's happening, something changes. You begin to listen, not with your ears, but with your body, with your soul, with the silent wisdom that activates when everything outside seems silent. And what you hear isn't a call to turn back. It's not an invitation to beg for return. It's a whisper that says, keep going, because on the other side of this crossing lies something that can only be reached by those who haven't given up on themselves along the way. The light you found in your spiritual journey was not meant to be shared with those who still live in darkness by choice. As much as your soul longs to be understood, not everyone is ready to grasp the silence you now inhabit. And that's okay. It just means you're vibrating at a clearer frequency, a frequency that demands more truth, more surrender, more wholeness. And these things aren't found just anywhere. They reveal themselves when you stop looking. What you're experiencing is a purification, an energetic, emotional, and spiritual cleansing. The universe is removing everything that doesn't resonate with your new consciousness. And this includes people, places, feelings, habits, old ways of relating. The pain you feel now is attachment being ripped away. It's control losing its power. It's the ego trying to resist the fluidity of the new. But the soul knows. It knows that after all this, something will come that will make all this silence worthwhile. If you feel like this text describes you, if something inside you is being touched with that deep clarity that only the truth can bring, then write in the comments, I am being cleansed by silence. This phrase is more than an affirmation. It's an acknowledgement, a hug you give yourself, a confirmation that you understand, even if it still hurts, that the emptiness you feel today is the space your soul needs to flourish. Perhaps today you're more sensitive, not in the sense of weakness, but in the sense of perceiving what previously went unnoticed. You feel the weight of unspoken words, hidden intentions, emotions that linger in the air even when no one speaks. There's a radar inside you that's become more refined, more acute, more connected to what vibrates silently. And this, as beautiful as it may seem, also exhausts you, because you begin to see the world as it is, raw, sometimes shallow, often incoherent, and this gives you a kind of existential fatigue. Conversations that once seemed pleasant now sound like noise. Social gatherings, rehearsed smiles, cliches, all of it has lost its luster. You find yourself in the middle of a circle of people and feel like leaving. Not out of contempt, but because you feel like you're in a different rhythm, on a different frequency. What nourishes you now is depth. It's real connection. It's presence. And how difficult it is to find that when the world seems to be moving in the opposite direction, when everything revolves around performance, distraction, and appearances. Maybe you've tried to return to the same places you were before, talk to the same people, re-establish the same connections, but something inside you freezes, not out of arrogance but out of lucidity. You realize you no longer fit there, and that's painful, because it involves goodbyes you don't verbalize. It involves witnessing the death of versions of yourself that for so long were your shelter. Before, you strived to maintain these connections, even though they emptied you. Now, you respect your silence. You respect your limits. You've learned, even if through tears, that the love that demands you abandon yourself isn't love. It's an illusion. Do you remember when you still begged for love? When you accepted emotional scraps just to feel like you weren't alone? When you wore masks to be accepted, to be chosen, to not be left behind? That version of you was you too, and she did the best she could. But today you look at her with compassion, and you choose differently. You choose to remain silent instead of begging. You choose your own company instead of begging for presences that don't see you. You choose to lose people instead of continuing to lose yourself. This gap is frightening, because you still don't know what this new path will be like. You still miss being welcomed, being seen, being embraced by someone who says, "I understand you." But at the same time, there's a silent force growing within you. A force that doesn't shout, but sustains. That doesn't make a fuss, but puts down roots. This force is your soul taking shape. It's your spirituality maturing. It's the awakening that stabilizes, that finds ground, that becomes a home. You are in the midst of a journey, a time when there are no external certainties, but there is an internal recognition. The soul knows where it is going, even if the feet don't yet know the path. You feel caught between two worlds, the old, crumbling one, and the new, yet to fully manifest itself. And in this space between there is silence. Yes, there is solitude, yes, but there is also healing. A healing that comes not from ready-made formulas, but from the raw truth of what is being experienced. Maybe you're experiencing this right now. Maybe you woke up today with that feeling of displacement. Maybe you tried to talk to someone and felt misunderstood. Maybe you sought refuge in some old memory, only to realize it no longer serves you. Maybe you're trying to convince yourself that you're not regressing, that you're not losing everything. And you're not. You're simply being called to something greater, something that requires emptying, requires surrender, requires trust. The cycle of pain you've endured has brought you here. The wounds you tried to hide today become a gateway to light. The vulnerability you considered weakness today becomes strength. And as contradictory as it may seem, it's at this point, when everything seems uncertain, that you begin to find yourself. Your ego still tries to convince you that being alone is a sign of failure, but your soul whispers that being alone, in this moment, is a privilege, an invitation, a portal of transformation. You may feel lost, but you're closer to yourself than you've ever been. What's happening now isn't disorientation, it's realignment. And yes, there are days when it weighs on you. There are days when you wonder if everything is okay, if you're demanding too much, feeling too much, expecting too much. But silently, the answer arrives. You're not expecting too much. You've simply stopped accepting too little. And that changes everything. Fear tries to make you go back, tries to push you back into your comfort zone, into old patterns, into familiar bonds, even if they're painful. But you no longer fit in those places. You've seen too much. You've felt too much. You've awakened too much to pretend you don't know. Now it's time to stand up for yourself, to walk even with your heart trembling, to trust the strength that's being built within you, even if it's still in process. The gap between the old and the new is the womb of transformation. It's the point of tension where you learn to trust the unseen, to listen to your soul, to move forward without proof. It's not a comfortable place, but it's sacred, because it's there that you stop being the woman who asked for love and become the woman who is love. If you feel like you're at this point in your journey, if what's been said here seems to have been written directly to your soul, write in the comments, I choose my presence, even in silence. This phrase is an anchor, a reminder, a small altar of words where you confirm that, even when everything seems empty, you keep going. Because something inside you already knows that this silence is healing you. You spent most of your life trying not to feel alone. You created bonds, some genuine, others barely bearable. You molded yourself, slowed yourself down, sped up, silenced yourself, and gave yourself away. All so that absence wouldn't crush you. All so that the emptiness wouldn't speak louder than the sound of the world around you. And then, when you began to awaken spiritually, something changed. You turned away from everything that seemed like a distraction, from everything that kept you busy but not fulfilled. You finally stopped. You stopped to listen to yourself. And it was at that moment that you realized, perhaps the loneliness you so feared wasn't the end. Perhaps it was the beginning of everything. The shift in consciousness doesn't happen on a specific day. It's subtle. It happens when, for the first time, you sit in your own silence and no longer feel the need to run away. When you realize that your own presence sustains you, that there's something inside you that doesn't demand approval, that doesn't ask for applause, that doesn't need constant reminders that it's enough. The soul doesn't shout, it whispers. And when you begin to listen, you understand that you were never alone. You were just distant from yourself. You are not alone. You are with yourself. And that is sacred. It is revolutionary. It is the beginning of a journey that no longer depends on who stays or goes, on who validates you or abandons you, on who understands or judges. Because now, what guides you is your essence. It is the most intimate and true part of you, the one that doesn't need to adapt to be accepted because you have already accepted yourself. You are returning to the deepest home there is, your own soul. This is where the journey changes. When you stop looking outside for answers and begin to understand that everything you've ever sought already resides within you. Love, meaning, direction, clarity, strength. All of this begins to emerge when the external noise quiets and you learn to trust what you feel, even if you don't yet fully understand it. This is the point at which the wound becomes a portal and solitude becomes a temple. Rumi wrote, "Don't settle for stories of how things happened to others. Awaken your own legend." This phrase isn't a pretty metaphor. It's a call, a reminder that your life has a unique script, a singular dance, a path that only you can follow. There's no point in trying to follow other people's models, trying to replicate stories that weren't born from your pain, your search, your truth. Your legend begins when you stop chasing approval and start walking toward yourself. And yes, this takes courage. Because while you were content with being a supporting character in others' lives, existence seemed more predictable. But now, as you become the protagonist of your own story, everything changes. The questions become deeper, the choices more conscious, the emotions more intense. The emptiness of before gives way to a silence filled with presence. The fear of being alone dissolves in the realization that being with you is the safest place to be. This shift doesn't happen because everything around you has changed. It happens because you've changed within. You've looked at yourself with truth, with compassion, with wholeness. You've acknowledged your own pain, not as something to be avoided, but as a reminder of what still needs healing. You've stopped running and started embracing. And in this embracing, everything reorganizes. Not magically, but truly. Because now, you no longer depend on external circumstances to feel alive. You belong to yourself. And this inner belonging changes everything. Perhaps your legend begins here. Not when the world applauds you, but when you decide to walk, even in silence. When you choose to continue, even without guarantees. When you honor every bit of what you feel, even when it's confusing, painful, uncomfortable. Because now you know that discomfort is also part of healing. That vulnerability is a strength. That silence is a teacher. That emptiness often is just space being prepared for what's to come. You no longer need to prove anything to anyone, not even to yourself. You just need to be. And that's more than enough. The world taught you that you needed to mold yourself, please, perform. But the soul doesn't mold itself, it expands. And when you give your soul permission to expand, the world around you slowly begins to realign. The right people start arriving. The right places reveal themselves. The right opportunities arise. because you stopped seeking outside what was already flourishing within. Awakening is lonely, yes, but it's not a punishment. It's a rebirth. And like every birth, it requires pain, it requires rupture, it requires courage to get through. But when you get through, something inside you never goes back to sleep, and this awakened consciousness begins to guide you, even on days of uncertainty, even on dark nights, even when everything seems still. Because you already know, being with yourself is what keeps you alive. If this makes sense to you, if somehow this passage echoes something you hadn't been able to name, write in the comments, "My legend begins now," because this simple phrase can be the turning point, not just in the video but in you. And by writing, you don't just express yourself, you declare to the universe that you're ready to walk in your own light, even when it still seems dim. Because deep down you already know it's stronger than you imagine. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you has been touched. And perhaps like me, you're also going through this silent journey, learning to transform your pain into presence, your emptiness into a temple, your loneliness into a path. The light you found now needs to learn to live within you, not as a passing visitor, but as a firm, constant, sacred dwelling. If this video felt like a mirror, if it spoke to parts of you that you didn't even know needed to be seen, subscribe to the channel, because this journey doesn't end here. Here, it's only just begun. There's so much more waiting for you, and I'll be here, with you, every step of the way. And if you stuck around until the end, don't forget to leave a like, not just for me, but for you, because recognizing what touches the soul is also part of healing. Now continue your walk. The next video is already appearing on your screen, and maybe it's exactly what your soul needed to hear right now.